I'm back with the 46th governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. You can follow him on Twitter at @GovRonDeSantis. Ron, it's, wow, this woke phenomenon, I won't say came out of nowhere. In fact, I've been writing about political correctness going back to the 1990s. It's been around in some form, but the rapidity of its takeover of these major institutions, I mean, I suppose to some degree we can say we expected it in academia, maybe we expected it in the media. But we've all often thought about the military as a conservative institution, corporate America as reasonably conservative, the FBI as a conservative police agency of government, Disney as conservative in the sense that Disney for decades promoted a kind of Americana. How do you account for the deep penetration of this woke madness into previously conservative institutions?
I think it's a function of our education system. I mean, I remember being on campus and, with some of these Ivy League schools, the nonsense that's there. And I always told myself, this is crazy, but the minute they get into the real world, none of this stuff's going to fly. So it's kind of harmless. Well, I think really the joke was on people like us, because what happened is, as these people got into these different institutions in society over the last couple decades, they are bringing with them a worldview. And it's really a worldview that's synonymous with the people in our ruling class, people in these institutions who think it's their right to govern us, even without our consent. And so all the assumptions that they bring to bear about our country and society are shared across institutions. And it's not like they're even coordinating this. It's just a natural outgrowth of the intellectual foundation they carry themselves with. But you're right to think about, like, I'm a Navy veteran, and I was proud to wear the cloth of the country, the great people. I was proud of the service. Jack Kennedy said, if you look back on your life and say, I served in the Navy, you could have a great deal of satisfaction. Well, now what do you see? You see them recruiting with, like, using drag queens and doing stuff with the pronouns and all this other stuff. That's part of the main reason recruiting is so low. So I do think, like, as you looked at the battles with the left in the past, their imprint on society is much broader today than it was 30 or 40 years ago. We knew we had to battle them in the halls of legislatures and in the halls of the Congress. We knew things like academia were going to be what they were. But I think a lot of us viewed in the past institutions like businesses as being more neutral, and places like the military even exemplifying conservative values. And those days are over. And that's why it's important that we fight back and reclaim these institutions.
I saw a video on social media just a day or two ago, and it was this Taliban guy, and he had in front of him a big piano and some musical instruments that he was smashing with a hammer. Now, the reason I mention this is that if I'd seen the same video a decade ago, I would have been like, this is the kind of madness that goes on. This is the kind of suppression of talent, of creativity that is characteristic of these unfree societies. But then it occurred to me today, I sort of have a mixed feeling about this, because I look at that and I go, in some form, that's going on in America. Obviously, the people aren't smashing musical instruments, but they're smashing statues. They're going after creative people because they don't subscribe to woke ideology. So, is it the case now that the line between us and them, between the free and the unfree, is more blurred than before? And we have a real fight to protect. If freedom is going to be we're going to be a beacon of freedom around the world, we've got to consolidate it here first, right?
Well, think about what's going on these college campuses. Look what happened at Stanford Law School, where they shout down a federal judge. Look how they treated the swimmer Riley Gaines at San Francisco State University. You have these centers which are trying to impose orthodoxy, and they don't allow any dissent. I've told our folks here in Florida's university system, if you have behavior like Stanford Law School from these students or San Francisco State, those kids should be expelled from school. And guess what would happen? If you just did that one time, you'd see a change in the culture. But as it's now, academia, they let the inmates run the asylum. So I think we're in a situation where you have rigid orthodoxy being imposed, particularly in some of these monolithic intellectual centers like university. And there's a lot of people, Dinesh, as we fought against this in our universities and put conservative trustees on places like New College, where we're really getting rid of the DEI framework and everything across. there are like left of center professors around the country who are interested in coming to Florida because even for them, they're walking on eggshells. If they say one wrong thing, that could be the end of their career if you're violating the canons of wokeism. And so I really believe that the woke ideology is a mortal threat to a free society. And if we lose these looming battles over the next 5 or 10 years, I think it's going to be very difficult to recover from that.
Talk for a minute about this phenomenon called ESG, because it seems to me to be a way in which these huge conglomerations of investment capital are able to manipulate companies into following a climate agenda, kind of a fanatical climate agenda, by essentially saying that we will give a black mark against you that will make it difficult for you to raise capital if you don't conform. So Florida is one of the states that is pushing back against ESG. How?
Well, first, what they're trying to do with ESG, I mean, they're trying to marshal considerable financial resources to change policy, to change our society without having to go through the normal legislative and constitutional process. These are people that don't stand for election. They're not accountable to the electorate. And so our view in Florida is very simple. No social or economic transformation without representation. We're going to fight back against ESG. We've banned ESG from being used in our state pension fund, which is a $180 billion fund, very significant. We've also said no to using ESG for government procurement at the local or state level. We've also said the rating agencies, when they're grading municipal or state bonds, are not allowed to use ESG scores as part of the credit rating. We fund the rating agencies, basically. And so if they do that, they're going to lose business from the state of Florida. And then we provided support for Floridians against woke banking. Because what's happening is you have Wall Street banks that collude to try to marginalize people they disagree with. Yes, it could be involving so-called global warming and all these other things, but it's also anti-Second Amendment. It's also anti-things that just don't conform with the modern day leftist agenda. And that is changing policy without having to actually go through the process. And so I think on a fundamental level, ESG is trying to impose bad policy, which is significant because I think it would do serious damage to the country. But on a more fundamental than that, it's just who governs society. Do we govern ourselves under written constitutions, or do these captains of industry and the asset managers, do they have a special place where they get to go on an ideological joyride, and then we're basically left picking up the bill for the destruction that they wrought?
I can see why people say that Florida is the place where woke goes to die. Governor Ron DeSantis, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.